We know that businesses have a culture, but do they also have a personality? Good, juicy stuff to get into. Welcome to another episode of The Good, Bad, and Ugly of Business. I'm your host, Katrin Becker. And on this podcast, we talk to all sorts of different successful people so that we can learn about their failures that they went through that made them so successful. Because while a smart person learns from their own mistakes, a genius learns from the mistakes of others. So we're here to learn about those mistakes so we can either avoid them completely or we can fail faster through them. My guest today is an incredible woman, so incredible that her name is actually the Amazing Robyn, and she's an intuitive healer that is helping heal businesses as if they were their own people and entities, which she's going to tell us about how they actually are. So Robyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I love the title of your show, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. So I think everyone is going to have this crazy aha moment when we realize that a business is an entity. And what is an entity other than a collection of things? And so tell us more about what you do with businesses as entities.
Sure. So there's a reason why we register our companies, as an entity with the state. And an entity, in the scriptures or scientifically is an actual energy field. So it's not a coincidence that we're registering companies as an entity, whether it's an LLC or C Corp or whatever, right? And what that happens is in the quantum field, we have now planted a seed or birthed something. So we become co creators, just like with God. So we create something out of nothing. And now it has a new birth of energy. Now, that energy, just like a human being, has its own life purpose. And what's really cool about that is my life purpose usually will feed into the life purpose of this entity, and that entity will feed into my life purpose. Now, when
Mm.
something is off, it creates a block here or a block there. We are both now being affected by it. And this is what a lot of companies don't understand because they're always looking at what makes sense on paper.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. Let's talk about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, his life purpose was to create Apple, right? And Apple was feeding him, he was feeding Apple. And when he was removed from his company, what happened? It
So, yeah.
started to fail, right? Because his energy, which was his life purpose, was feeding the company, which nobody understood. So, of course, they hired it was like five, I can't remember the exact amount of how many CEOs they hired to take over after they removed him, like when the board removed Steve Jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were amazing on paper. They had amazing track records and backgrounds and educations, but they didn't have the energy to fulfill or to replace the life purpose of Steve Jobs because they didn't
Mm.
understand the energy structure of it. So that's just like one example when it comes to who's creating, who's the founders. So oftentimes when I'm jumping into energy work on a company, I can test to see whose energy is feeding, who's pulling away, who is more aligned with the life purpose of this company,
Mm.
morally, physically, sexually, mentally, spiritually, financially, all these things have to align, right? And they get really caught up on these paper like CEOs or leaders of the department and things like that, but don't look at the energy field of the structure of the departments, the company, everything. So that's what I do.
Well, and I think everyone can relate to a scenario where there's a group of people gathered and someone enters the room that changes the energy of the room, whether it's positively or negatively. We all know that feeling. And so to take that idea that we've all experienced and understand and be able to extrapolate it to a whole business makes so much sense and also seems so obvious. Like, well, of course, why aren't we treating this as an organism? And yet instead, we'll hear people say things like, oh, someone's a bad apple, right? But then that's the energy of that we're all individual containers that are just in the same bucket rather
Right.
than being all together as
Aligned.
one.
Right. That was a perfect example. We hear about like the bad apple will ruin the bunch, or you are what you eat, or if you want to be a millionaire, hang out with millionaires. You are who you hang out with.
Yeah.
Right. But we're not thinking about that when we have a huge corporation and we have 10 different departments, like our creative IT
Mm,
department, and the energy field of your leadership and how it drains down. They might be raw motivational, but energetically they are draining your department because when they go home at night, they're thinking about killing themselves,
mm,
or they have cancer, or they have been committing fraud, or they're having an affair. And those things are weighing on their spirits or their mind. And
yeah.
nobody knows. And they're great at business. They're great at putting a smile on their face. But all of a sudden, this department starts to fail. The numbers start to drop, and nobody knows why. So they do the logical stuff. The logical stuff is, repackage, rebrand to, you know, get different leaderships, do some leadership training, sales training, all these things. And that's very logical. And I can give you examples of this, like so many. Would you like a
Of
perfect
course. I love a
example
good
of one of my
story.
clients? I do too. So I never name drop. I'm just very discreet with my clients, but there's a very well-known company that we are all very familiar with that's a green drink. It started out as a green drink, and now they have multiple flavors of like fresh juice. And it's being sold in like natural grocers, Whole Foods, things like that, right? And one day their sales started to plummet and they couldn't
Mm,
figure it out. So they did the normal stuff. They repackaged, rebranded, did everything. They even purchased the positioning in the aisles. So it was eye level, all that. They even tried couponing at the grocery stores. They surveyed their clients and people could not answer them why they were no longer purchasing it.
mm,
They thought it was because more competitors came on the market and there was too many options now. So, long story short, somebody said, "Hey, we want you to talk to this intuitive consultant," who happened to be me. So, I get on the phone with them. And by the way, when somebody gets on the phone with me, they're not allowed to tell me anything. They're not allowed to tell me why they booked the call, whatever issues they have. Not, I don't want to hear one thing. All I want is your name or the name of the company and that I have permission to tap in.
mm.
As soon as I have permission, that's like the thumbprint. That's the frequency. I can hyper focus. So I said, "Hey, about 2 years ago, did you guys change your manufacturing facility?" And they said, "Yeah, but that has nothing to do with why we called." I said, "Okay, that's okay. I just wanted to check." And so that gives me confirmation that I'm on the right track, right? Because I just learned something that they didn't tell me.
Right.
So
Or
I
that the
tap in
average
again and I
person
say,
could even find out.
"Right."
Yeah.
I always say you can't make this stuff up. So when I go in and I tap and I said, "Okay, look, your manufacturing facility, I know that they're performing on paper and they're doing a great job, but the owner of that facility is committing fraud. And
Mm,
what he's doing for your product is kind of a cover story. So, yes, he's facilitating manufacturing and then packaging your product, and that's going great, but there's some shady stuff going on after hours. And because the owner of that facility is shady, like attracts like, which means he would hire employees that are in similar mindset, that are willing to do shady stuff on the side.
mhm,
So now let's break that down. Your product is super healthy, it's alive. You made it to make people healthy. If it's alive, it can be programmed, it can be manipulated by energy fields, just like water can, just like plants can, just like humans can. So now you have the super healthy green drink that's in an environment with shady things going on, which is a very low vibration. They're the last ones to touch your product before it goes to your customer.
hmm,
And I bet you when you surveyed your customers, they didn't know why they were not buying it any longer, did they? And they said no. And I said, because it felt differently.
mm,
And they were just, I mean, a huge epiphany. They just didn't even think about that. So what I did is I cleaned up the energy, which I can do because I'm a healer, but also I have a specialty in quantum physics. So I cleaned up the energy of the facility, what was feeding into the product. So that was a temporary band-aid, right? So it couldn't be manipulated. I protected it, shielded it, cleaned it. So then I created a whole business plan where they could then take their profits, which I increased their profits by 38% in less than 6 months. Now, from there, we took those profits and funneled them into a plan where they could be in control of their own manufacturing facility, where they could own their own commercial buildings, which now gave them more assets, more profit, less overhead,
Yeah.
right?
And
But
control.
that's just one example that nobody would even think of. 2 years they went doing all the right things that's on paper, and it
Well,
was that one quick fix.
and if we take it like from the macro of the business, it's the same human behavior that when people are trying to feel better inside themselves, we always look to all the outside things first. You
Oh,
know,
yes.
I mean, I know I felt that way. I was like, well, I guess I need another degree. I need to change jobs. I need to move. But I never looked internally to see where are things misaligned internally and do that work. And turning inward was the main shift. So it's such a similar, what
It
is
is.
outside is within, that it mirrors it in all the different ways. So that was such a great way to describe that. But now my next question is, how did you get to this point? Which I'm sure you get asked all the time, but it's such a different career path, one that there needs to be more of, but you've got to be one of the pioneers leading this work.
Yeah, and for a long time, it just really wasn't discussed. So, like, if people read my bio or hear a story about me, they always call me like the secret weapon behind the scenes. Like, I'm a secret. And I was for a long time. And how it kind of got started for me is so I have an ability to see things from the past, current, and future. So I'm a seer. I'm also a holistic doctor and homeopathic, and then I have a specialty in quantum physics. So I have a lot of different skill sets,
Mhm.
and I'm an entrepreneur. I've owned 15 different companies, and I currently have five, and I sit on the board of a few. So that's a lot of tools in my tool belt. But how my career kind of got started was I used to prepare companies and private organizations for catastrophic events in the future.
Mhm.
So people would hire me because I could see things coming in the future and that would help them with their investments or their companies or their families or government, whatever. So back, years and years ago, that big earthquake that hit Japan, the one
Mhm.
with the big tsunami, I had a spiritual vision that something was going to happen really bad in the region. And I was working with some big boys in the industry building survival communities. So I had positioned them 3 days prior to the earthquake. And it got so much notice that CNN contacted them and said, "How did you guys know?" And they said, "Robyn Peterson." So that really took my career into a different direction. And, I gained a lot of different skill sets from just that. But then I went more into the healing side of things.
Mhm.
And that took a lot more training. So I've had training all around the world to develop my gifts, to know different types of healing from reprogramming a brain to healing the body and the mind. So there's a lot of different skill sets there. It's not just one or the other. But what I like about doing energy work for companies is I can literally shift and heal and change environments and cause a ripple effect for thousands of people overnight versus a one-on-one because people don't realize that companies are a pathway. They're like a vehicle for growth. And that's why you notice that people that do the most personal growth and spiritual growth typically are entrepreneurs, aren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
And so those companies and those people are always seeking growth. And they are the ones that carve our earth. They're the ones that make things beautiful in the world because they're a collection of people that have so much influence and they don't even realize.
And that's just true of all people, isn't it? I mean, going
Yeah,
back to your
absolutely.
example of the green juice, like those customers had no idea why they weren't buying it, but they were sensing something.
Hmm.
And yet,
Yeah.
most people will either completely ignore that part of them, or when they see other people who do have those gifts, try to find ways to downplay it or be like, no, that's wrong. That can't possibly be right. So you must have faced so much not conflict, but maybe doubt, um, of people not believing that you do what you do. So how did you even come to the place where you could develop your gifts and accept them without being bombarded with other people's expectations?
Well, I appreciate doubt.
Mm,
I appreciate atheists. I appreciate skeptics. And quite frankly, I don't really talk about my spiritual gifts all that often. I don't market. All of my clients have come from referral based, which a third party verification is always going to be the most powerful, right?
mm.
But there are a ton of people that try to put me to the test all the time, and I welcome that. So I'm like, no problem. Let's set up a 5-minute call. You can see in 5 minutes what I can see. And so that's okay. But I do think that for a lot of years, it was kind of this hush hush thing. But in all reality, the government has been using remote viewers and mediums and psychics and oracles for years and years and years. And if we
Mm,
go even before that, we could go to ancient stuff. The scriptures talk about oracles and spiritual gifts. We've had kings and rulers and royal families that were using spiritual advisors. This is where the term like wizards came from, and
right.
all of that stuff. So people have always been using. The difference is finding something that is more of truth and light to you. Who
Mm,
are you aligning with? If you're a light seeker, then I might be more attracted to you. You're going to align with me. You're going to feel if I'm speaking truth to you. But somebody else who might not be aligned to that and they're just looking for
mm.
a quick fix or something shady, I'm not going to be the person for them.
Yeah.
And they're going to align to something else. And so there's a lot of different spiritual gifts. There's a lot of things that are being used behind the scenes. It's just now starting to be talked about. But this has been going on for, millennia, really.
That's a really good point. I think as some of my gifts started coming online, there was a lot of things that I had to resolve around other people saying, oh, this is witchcraft or
Oh, yeah.
devil worshiping or all of this stuff. And it's like, how can something that feels so
Mhm.
absolutely perfect in my soul not be for the best and highest good?
Yeah. I've had to have that discussion many, many times, and I think that it's appropriate to discuss it, especially when people have that thought come up because they do get scared, they do worry, and sometimes they think like we shouldn't be dabbling in these things or that's up to God. And I hear it all the time and I see what the thoughts that people have, and I think that they're all appropriate, but they just keep it to themselves where I'd rather them discuss it with me.
Mm.
But I think there's a huge misconception that as Christians or spiritual people, that once we have a spiritual gift, how dare you? Even though we know they exist, but as soon as you claim one, how dare you? It's blasphemy. And we've been taught for, a long hundreds of years that we are easily deceived.
Mm.
And that, the devil or the adversary or negativity or evil is always out to get us, always trying to screw us up in our minds. And so that's where people have this subconscious baggage of, oh, we have to be careful because you could be easily deceived. You're deceived, I'm deceived. Either way, right? But
Sure.
in all honesty, it's pretty hard to be deceived. It is, especially if you're somebody who is seeking growth and light and truth. It's easier for people to be deceived if they have a brain injury, a mental illness, if they're alcoholics, drug addicts. Those are things where you can be easily deceived. Absolutely. But people who tend to go for growth or light or have spiritual practices and are seekers, it's hard to be deceived. Even if you're caught up in your own bias information, you usually get clarity pretty quick.
Right. You'll be able to feel it.
Usually get redirected into truth pretty quick.
Mm.
So I always tell everybody it's not about the information that you receive from somebody like me or like you with the spiritual gift, right? It's really about the confirmations. That's where it really gets interesting. So the scriptures talk about three witnesses often. In multiple religions and multiple scriptures, it always references witnesses.
Mhm.
Witnesses are confirmations. And so if I tell you something, we need to have three confirmations or more sometimes. That's how you know if it's of truth. That's why it's hard to be deceived. Because if it is true, you will have multiple confirmations.
Hmm.
And people just don't know that. And so they can cast something out right away, like something that's clean and pure, even God communicating with you, the spirit communicating with you. You could cast it out because you're like, oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And we do it all the time with our inspiration, our creativity, our vision for our business, all those things, right? We go and talk to all of our friends. You're like, hey, I had this idea. I was thinking about doing this and that. We're always looking for confirmations. We just don't realize that. But if
And
it,
through all of the different people that I've interviewed, so many times, they talk about the years in which things weren't working, in the years where there was struggle, where there was doubt, where there was people saying, "You're crazy. What are you doing?" But they had such conviction within their heart and soul that this is what they were meant to do, and they kept going. And now it's like, well, of course you're a success. That was such a brilliant idea. It seems so obvious now, but it's because they didn't give up. And I think about all of the brilliant ideas and inspiration that's been given to us that we haven't enacted, we haven't put into motion because of these fears and doubts. And I would love for people to be more
yes,
able to trust their own instincts and their own
intuition.
magnificence.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite things to do for my clients is actually develop their spiritual antennas and to teach them how to get multiple confirmations so that they can trust and build their own intuition, their own gut instinct, their own spiritual gifts, and use it as an extra power in their business.
Mm,
Because once you start to know how to test things in the quantum field, test things with God, test things spiritually, test things within yourself, and have multiple confirmations, you become unstoppable because you don't need everybody else's validation or approval anymore. Those people that you were just talking about that went years without struggle is because they were talking to the wrong people.
mm,
Too often, we're getting counsel, advice, validation from our friends and family, and friends and family not are not necessarily always the best people, especially if we're starting a company. If I want to start a company and I have a dream, a vision that's so out of the box, why would I go talk to one of my family members that's been W-2 his whole life?
yeah, knows nothing about it.
Because he obviously doesn't know how to take the same type of risk. It's that whatever that risk was, it's kept him back. He hasn't jumped on it, right? So if I want to start a company and have vision and I want validation, I should be going and talking to somebody who's done something like that. That's where those mentors come into play, right? Just like marriage advice. If I want marriage advice, why would I talk to my best friend that's never been married?
Right.
Right. So we got to be really careful about who we're getting our counsel from. But that holds them back because I guarantee all those people you talk to had years of confirmation, years of instinct kind of pouring into them, but they weren't getting the validation from everybody else. So as soon as a hard time came, they went into that self-doubt and it held them back for a long time.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's so much truth to that. So you've picked up all of these incredible skills and talents and toolboxes. Are you still seeking knowledge and growth? Like what is kind of the next thing that you're looking for and reaching for?
I'm always seeking. So I read 2 books a week. Um, I'm constantly learning. But I want to express one of the main reasons that when a client gets on the phone with me, whether it's a corporation or an individual who's sick and has cancer, it doesn't matter for me. The main reason that I don't allow them to tell me anything is because I'm always growing and testing myself too.
Mm,
Because oftentimes people will get on the phone with you and want to regurgitate their identity of their problem to you. That's biased information. I can also gather all kinds of information by a couple sentences that you say to me,
mhm.
right? Because I could be a good reader, just like a lot of people. But if you don't say anything to me, I don't know anything about you. I'm also testing myself, aren't I? So
Mm,
that way I can say to myself, I can't make this up. There's no way for me to have known that. And it helps me to have faith in myself too, because I'm growing in my gifts. My gifts change every day. And so that's a huge thing for me. I always say, like, I'm in doubt too. I'm not perfect, just like everybody else. So that's a way for me to always stay in practice and to have more faith and growth in myself. And that's really, really important to me.
mm. So you'd mentioned the business clients that you work with, but then it also made it sound like there was students, for lack of a
Oh
better
yeah.
word. So so is that another part of your business that you work on?
Yes. So I have retreats and stuff like that. But my main thing when it comes to my students is I teach them how to develop their spiritual gifts, their spiritual antennas, and to have higher connections to things that are supernatural. Typically, that's going to be God and whatever channels from that. And it's different for everybody. I teach all religions. I teach it in three different ways, from quantum physics, from science to religious base. So that way, every type of mind can understand. So that's one of my favorite things to do is to teach that. And I have spiritual awakening classes and things like that. I use quantum codes to program water to increase natural levels of DMT in the brain, and then give people spiritual protocols to follow, and then teach them how to amplify their connection. I look at it as our Wi-Fi.
Mm,
So a lot of times when I'm doing public speaking, I always ask this question. There could be 1,000 people in a room or in a corporation, and I'll say, how many of you can tell me if you're on a conference call driving home, where that call is going to drop, where your drop zones are? And everybody raises their hand,
sure.
right? I said, how many of you can tell me where the fastest Wi-Fi is in your house or in your office, where you can get the fastest download? All of them. No. And I say, okay, how many of you can tell me where your drop zones are spiritually?
Hmm.
Why are you dropping off? Why are you not receiving revelation, prophetic dreams, visions? Why are you not hearing the voice of God? Why are you not seeing the face of God? Where's that dropping off at? None of them know. And I
Mm,
said, okay, well, where's your Wi-Fi hotspot? Where can you receive the most downloads, the most prophetic information, revelation? None of them know. I'm like, you all know more about your phone than you do yourself.
mm,
You know more about your phone than your spiritual connection. You know more about your phone than you do God and communication with God. Which one's more important? Which one's going to level you up? That's like driving a Ferrari and only staying in second and third gear when you spent millions of dollars on this badass Ferrari, but you've never taken it out of second and third gear when you could go to fourth, fifth, and sixth gear. What could you accomplish in those gears?
mm-hmm.
How fast could you be? And they just don't even, and that's really the difference, right? So if all of us were spiritually connected and amplifying each other all the time, how beautiful would that be if everybody was in their prime optimization of their potential? And that's really what I do. So even if I'm working with a CEO of a corporation, I am going to make sure that that CEO and the leadership team is in their full optimization so that they can sustain this company. And then that energy will pour down to everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so people just don't look at it, right? They just don't know what they don't know.
I mean, yeah, I'm just, for lack of words, which is very rare for me. But it's so true. And I think it's because I'm still like marinating in those questions that you asked of where is it that we drop off? And it's like that is, and it's not a question that, even though I can tell you exactly which roads I lose Wi-Fi on or cell service,
Mhm.
it's not a quick answer to come up with that. And that is really illuminating in so many ways.
It is. And it's easy to find out. I've created courses that are the fast tracks for that. And the reason where that came from, just I was a gospel teacher for like 15 years and I studied religion for a long time and I was addicted to revelation. And I used to go to great lengths my spiritual practice. Like I'd go fasting in the woods, I'd go camping in the top mountains by myself. I'd be having it out with God. I'd be, doing all these things, fasting and praying and learning and all of these things. And that can be exhausting because you're always trying to prove your worth in some way to use a spiritual gift or to get this blessing or whatever it is, right? So I would go to these great lengths. And then as soon as I felt short of something in my own mind, I felt like those gifts were being removed in some way, which
Mm.
it was subconscious BS is really what it was. But that's also not everybody can just go to the woods and camp by themselves, right? So I started to get to a place once the connection is so established, you should be able to be in any environment, chaotic, loud, at a bar, at a strip club, in trauma, on the floor in the ER, praying for someone, begging for help. In any of those moments, you should be able to connect. You should be able to have an immediate answer, like in the form of a download.
Mm.
And so it took me years to figure out how to have that at all times. And so I teach people those shortcuts because I spent years and years going through it myself.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, who Dr. Joe Dispenza is?
Mhm.
Okay, well, Dr. Joe Dispenza is amazing. And he teaches people how to get an alpha brain, right?
Mhm.
That's his goal. He teaches you meditation practices to get into alpha brain, which could take you about a year. So, what he teaches you to do in your meditations and get into alpha brain, I can do that in a week. And then in 3 to 4 weeks total, I can now raise your spiritual antenna, open up your third eye, develop your spiritual gifts, put you in alpha brain, have you have multiple connections and confirmations of everything that it's real, that you're not crazy, and that it's of truth and light, and how to measure how much truth and light it is. So that's kind of my whole goal. And I've been very, very successful with that. And I know those are some pretty bold statements. It's just that I'm impatient. I want things now. And so it was my own personal spiritual protocols and practice. And then I did case studies to prove it, to see if I could duplicate it. And I can. So not because something special about me. That's just my personality.
Well, you're obviously the real deal. I'll have all your information in the show notes, but for our auditory listeners, please let them know how they can get in touch and work with you.
Oh, my website is amazingrobyn with a y.com. And my phone number's on there. Me or my assistant or my team will always get back to someone. We get hundreds of messages. I try to respond to all of them. But if there's anything I can do to help someone, I go above and beyond. That's my work. That's my passion. I feel deeply connected to people. So just reach out anytime.
Well, thank you so much for being on here. I selfishly feel like I was just asking all of my own questions. So thank you so much for being here and sharing that. I think there's so much truth there and so much that I hope people will open their minds to and give it a second thought and say, what if?
Yeah, what if? And if there was, would you want to know?
That's right. That's right. But thank you again so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for sharing all the good stories of the good and bad and ugly of business.
And to the listeners, wow, what an incredible, amazing interview. I hope you are as impacted as I am and gives you so much to ponder because that's where the real juice is. So until next time, everyone, have a great day.